Hello and welcome to the Daily Aus. I'm Emma.
I'm Billi.
US President Donald Trump has announced plans for an American takeover in the Gaza Strip.
Everybody I've spoken to loves the idea of the United States owning that piece of land, developing and creating thousands of jobs in a really magnificent area that nobody can look because all they see is death and destruction and rubble.
The proposal, which would move around 2 million Palestinians to other countries, has drawn criticism from world leaders and the United Nations, who've denounced it as unlawful. Today, we'll unpack what Trump said, what the international reaction has been like, and whether or not his plan could or will actually happen.
We want to see, as have Australian government for a long period of time. We have had a long-standing bipartisan position for a two-state solution.
So, like you said, today we're talking about this joint press conference held in Washington on Wednesday, our time, between US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So Trump made several announcements in that press conference, but the one that is dominating global headlines is about this proposed US takeover in Gaza. What exactly did the president say?
So, as you said, Billi, Trump spoke alongside Netanyahu, and that came after a White House meeting between the two leaders. And it was at that press conference that followed those talks that the US president put forward his idea to place Gaza under the control of American occupation. Trump described the Gaza Strip as a decades-old, quote, symbol of death and destruction. He called Palestinians who live there very unlucky and described the Strip as a very unlucky place. And this is how he sort of introduced this idea that Gaza be rebuilt and be occupied by the US. Here's a bit of what he said.
We should go to other countries of interest with humanitarian hearts and build various domains that will ultimately be occupied by the 1.8 million Palestinians living in Gaza. This can be paid for by neighboring countries of great wealth. It could be numerous sites or it could be one large site, but the people will be able to live in comfort and peace.
Trump also said the only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza, in his words, is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. The US president didn't rule out sending American soldiers to Gaza as part of this planned takeover. He said, "We'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that."
There's so much to unpack here. I want to start with the response to these comments. What has the international community said?
There is a long list of countries who came out in opposition of this plan. So that includes Germany, France, Spain, the UK, Ireland, Brazil, China, Russia, Turkey. We did hear from the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, on Wednesday. He reiterated the government's support for a two-state solution where Palestinian and Israeli people can live in peace.
And Trump implied that neighbouring countries would have a role to play in this proposal, with plans for other Middle Eastern nations to accept Palestinian refugees. It's one thing for him to announce that, and it's a whole other thing for those countries to accept that. What have the neighbouring countries said?
Yeah, so throughout the Middle East, we saw this week a resounding criticism and opposition to this idea. Palestinian officials have called Trump's comments ridiculous and absurd. President Mahmoud Abbas strongly rejected the idea, which he said would be a major breach of international law. Riyad Mansour, he's the leader of the Palestinian delegation to the United Nations, and he said the Palestinian people want to rebuild Gaza because it's where they belong. Egypt has emphasised the importance of Palestinians remaining in the territory as they work to rebuild in Gaza and look to the future. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry responded and said it rejects any attempts to displace Palestinians, describing their stance as non-negotiable. We also heard from Jordan. Jordan has rejected, quote, any attempts to annex land and displace the Palestinians. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who we did see standing next to Trump during that announcement, he said that he thinks the US takeover in Gaza is something that could change history. And he described Trump as the greatest friend Israel has ever had in the White House.
I guess the key question on everyone's mind is, with the context of Palestinian officials being against this and also neighbouring countries being against this, is this something that could actually happen?
Hi, I'm Zara. I'm the co-founder of the Daily Aus, and we started this company because we think news can be done differently. If you agree, you can hit subscribe. It's the best way to help us grow. Now, back to the video.
So I guess in terms of answering the question of whether or not this could happen, we have to look at whether or not it's legal. And the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been somewhat vague in his language, specifically to do with Trump's comments. But during an address on the rights of Palestinian people following Trump's remarks, he said, "In the search for solutions, we must not make the problem worse. It is vital to stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing."
Do you want to explain what that term ethnic cleansing actually means?
Yeah, so a commission of UN experts describes ethnic cleansing as a, quote, purposeful policy designed by one ethnic or religious group to remove by violent and terror-inspiring means the civilian population of another ethnic or religious group from certain geographic areas. Now, a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was directly asked by a reporter this week at a press conference, does the Secretary General believe that President Trump's plan for the US to take over Gaza is ethnic cleansing? And the spokesperson said any forced displacement of people is tantamount to ethnic cleansing. Now, the act of forcibly moving civilians is forbidden under the Geneva Conventions, and that's the part of international humanitarian law that focuses on civilian treatment during war. But when we're talking separately about this idea of ethnic cleansing, it's not yet been recognised as an independent crime under international law. That being said, though, the actions that are involved in ethnic cleansing are unlawful. So, for example, murder, torture, rape, imprisonment, destruction of property, displacement and deportation, attacks on civilian areas, etc. These practices can, according to the UN, constitute crimes against humanity and can be assimilated to specific war crimes. Furthermore, the UN says such acts are related to genocide, which is a crime under international law.
Okay, so to recap, Trump hasn't necessarily broken any international laws by tabling this plan and his vision for Gaza. But if his plan became a reality and the US did take over there, it could lead to war crimes and breaches of international law.
Exactly. So for now, this is just talk, really, but it's hard to see how the plan could avoid breaching the Geneva Conventions at the very least, which outlaw forcibly removing civilians from a specific area.
And in the hours since Trump's announcement, what has the White House said? Because I've seen some commentary that they've possibly backtracked his comments slightly.
Yeah, so we heard from the US Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who attempted to play down the remarks or seek to clarify some of the language that we heard from Trump. So Rubio said the president has made it clear that the people of Gaza need to be temporarily relocated. So emphasizing that language, that it's a temporary idea of relocation rather than a permanent one. During a White House briefing, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt also clarified that point about temporary relocation, and that language shift might specifically tie back to those kind of legal flags that we discussed about the moving of civilians. She said Trump's, quote, historic proposal to take over Gaza underscores his commitment to, quote, eliminate Hamas and secure lasting peace for the region. Trump has received a lot of criticism from lawmakers within the US, even in his own party and around the world. But the White House press secretary defended the president and said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. She said President Trump is an outside-of-the-box thinker and a visionary leader who solves problems that many others, especially in this city, claim are unsolvable. Ultimately, though, Billi, Trump would need the consent of Palestine and the Palestinian people to legally make this plan a reality. And I think it's important to talk about this sort of common theme that has emerged from world leaders over the last couple of days, including from our very own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, about judging US President Trump on his actions rather than his words. And I think that rhetoric is something that will probably come up again over the next few months and the next few years. Albanese said, "I'm not going to, as Australia's Prime Minister, give a daily commentary on statements by the US President. My job is to support Australia's position." So from here, Billi, I guess we will keep an eye out and see what comes next.
That comment about judging US President Trump on his actions rather than his words, I've seen a lot of criticism about the media, that the media is focusing too much on what he says rather than what he does. And it's a conversation we're having as a newsroom that, you know, when his comments are such a departure from what the US has been saying for, you know, the last at least 4 years, if not the last decades, is that not worth reporting on? But if it actually hasn't happened yet, you know, there's this whole conversation about how do we report on it. But Em, I think you've done an excellent job of breaking it down for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Billi.
And thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Daily Aus. We'll be back again this afternoon with your afternoon headlines. But until then, have a great evening.